Hi guys, my name's Ariana and today I'm going to be demonstrating how to practice passive range of motion in the upper extremity. This video is for those of you who might have a friend or loved one at home that may need help or assistance in doing these motions. So hopefully this video will give you proper instructions on how to do so at home. A couple things to remember before we get started are, one, if the person is unable to communicate verbally with you, look for things such as facial expressions or body language indicating that they're in any pain or discomfort. And second, when you're performing the motion, once you feel any resistance in the muscle or joint, don't push any further to avoid, again, pain or causing any injury. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to go through a series of motions in the upper extremity, which include shoulder, elbow, wrist, and hand. You ready to go?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So we're going to start with shoulder flexion, and hand placement is really important when performing these motions. So you're going to take the client's arm and rest it in your arm, giving full support. And then we're going to use our other hand to hold the scapula, keeping the shoulder in place. And the first motion we're going to perform is flexion and extension. So flexion, we're going to bring the arm up towards the sky. And extension, we're bringing the arm back down towards the body and back a little further. So again, flexion up towards the sky and extension down and back behind the body. Okay, so the next motion we're going to perform is shoulder abduction and shoulder adduction. So for this, you want to make sure the thumb is facing up towards the sky, and we're going to bring the arm up for abduction and back down towards the body for adduction. So up towards the sky is abduction, and down towards the body is adduction. We're going to do the same thing, but horizontally. So we're going to bring the arm up this way, and bringing it away from the body is horizontal abduction out this way, and in towards the body and across is horizontal adduction. So abduction and adduction. Okay, and the last motion for the shoulder, we're going to be doing internal and external rotation. So for this, we're going to bend the client's arm this way, and we can still hold on to the shoulder. And we're going to bring the arm up towards the sky for external rotation and down towards the ground for internal rotation. So external rotation and internal rotation. So that wraps it up for the shoulder. Next, we're going to move on to the elbow. For this, we're going to want to place one hand under the wrist and one hand on the back of the bicep, just above the elbow. Keeping the elbow at 90 degrees close to the client's body. And we're going to start with flexion and extension. So we're going to move the arm towards the shoulder with palms facing up. This is elbow flexion. And back down and straight is elbow extension. Elbow flexion, elbow extension. All right, and then the last one for the elbow is pronation and supination. So we're going to keep our same hand placement, only this time we're going to twist the forearm down towards the ground for pronation and back up towards the sky for supination. So pronation and supination. So that's it for the upper part of the arm, and next we're going to move on to the wrist. Okay, so next we're moving on to range of motion in the wrist. For hand placement, we're going to have one arm on the underneath side of the forearm, just above the wrist, and your other hand underneath the client's hand, with your thumb on top to help facilitate the movement. So we're going to begin with wrist flexion and extension. So for flexion, we're going to bend the wrist down, and extension, bend it upwards, flexion, and extension. Next, we're going to go ahead and move the wrist side to side. So first, we're going to move the thumb in towards the forearm, which is called radial deviation. So this is radial deviation. And then ulnar deviation is moving the pinky towards the outer side of the forearm. So radial deviation and ulnar deviation. Perfect, so that concludes the wrist portion. Next, we're going to move on to the hands. For hand range of motion, we're going to start with the MCP joint. We're going to do flexion and extension. So we're going to hold the palm with your non-dominant hand and use your dominant hand to facilitate the movement. So the MCP joint is right here. So for flexion, we're going to bend at the joint downwards, and extension is bringing the fingers back up. Flexion and extension of the MCP joint. So next we're going to move on to the PIP joint, and for this I like to set the side of their hand down on a table or an armrest. Just makes it easier to control these movements. So we're going to do one finger at a time, starting with the index finger. So one hand we're going to hold this part of their finger to keep it in place, and we're going to use our other hand to facilitate the flexion and extension. So this is PIP flexion and PIP extension. PIP flexion, PIP extension. And then we're going to move up to the DIP, which is the distal interphalangeal joint. And we're going to do the same thing there. So we're going to hold a little higher up on the finger and use this hand to bend the joint. So this is DIP flexion, DIP extension. DIP flexion, DIP extension. We're going to do that on all the fingers individually. So again, hold here. For PIP flexion, we're going to bend down for flexion, out for extension, down for flexion, and out for extension. Then moving up to the DIP flexion, bending down for flexion, out for extension, down for flexion, and out for extension. So same thing here, hold the fingers stable, and we're going to bend at the PIP joint for flexion and extension. Flexion, extension, and up to the DIP joint. Flexion, extension, flexion, extension. Last finger is the pinky, so we're going to do the same thing. Bend at the PIP joint for flexion, extension, flexion, extension, and up to the DIP joint. Flexion, extension, flexion, extension. Last but not least, we're going to rotate the client's arm, palm facing upwards, so we can work with the thumb. With the thumb, we're going to just do CMC abduction and CMC adduction. So for abduction is moving away from the body. We're going to move the thumb out and away from the body. And adduction is just back to neutral. So abduction and adduction. All right, so that concludes our passive range of motion on the upper extremity. Hopefully these instructions taught you clearly so you can perform this at home with a loved one or a friend.